So I'll start off initially just presenting the team of us who work in the embassy in Paris. We're a team of about 30 people. I'll then move on to e-commerce straight away, and then I'll go back and just sort of give a general overview of France and some sort of insight into the opportunities that are available, the routes to market, and then some more general tips about doing business in France. So I work in the trade half of trade and investment, obviously helping British companies export to France. So I work in a team called the Consumer and Creative team. We also have biotech and new technologies in the trade team, and engineering, sorry. So we have two senior trade advisors, John, who works on food and drink, clothing, fashion, footwear, retail, and Sophie, who works on creative industries, media, design, financial services, things like that. And then there are four deputies under John and Sophie. I'm one of them, and we kind of deal with everything else. So it can really be anything that we've had, you know, biodegradable coffins, you know, garden furniture, swimwear. It can really be a variety of different sectors. So I'm going to just talk about e-commerce for a bit. E-commerce is something which really wasn't as developed in France as it is in the UK, but it's finally kind of reaching maturity. So even if the economy is struggling in France, it's kind of digital commerce is going from strength to strength, we'd say. So it's now the sixth largest e-commerce market in the world and the third largest in Europe after the UK and Germany. The turnover in 2014 was 57 million, which is up 11% from the previous year, so it's quite a lot. This is the source from this is the FEVAD, which is the e-commerce association in France. There's a lot of information on there about e-commerce which might be of interest. It's in French, but it's a very useful website, actually. So, yeah, the number of e-consumers is increasing. French people are it's becoming sort of second nature. The average price of the basket is actually going down. It's now 81, which is 10% lower than it was 3 years ago. But that's more than compensated by a kind of pattern of more frequent purchasing. There's an average of 20 online purchases per consumer versus 18 in 2013. And there's a 14% increase in the number of sites. It now represents 9% of all retail sales. That's not including food and drink. Some of the biggest sectors are homeware, house equipment, including electronics, which is 18% of all e-commerce sales, and fashion, shoes, textiles also represent a large chunk. That's about 15%. And the market, the turnover for the market is expected to increase even, you know, next year by a further 10% to 63 billion. So that's quite considerable. The leading e-commerce sites, obviously Amazon is by far and away the largest, but then you have some sites which are unique to France, including Cdiscount, Fnac, who are also a sort of brick and mortar retailer, eBay and Price Minister. Then you have what were originally mail order houses, La Redoute and Trois Suisses, who now are major players in the e-commerce market. And some of the others, as I said, are what we call brick and mortar traditional retailers. Leroy Merlin is a DIY store. I don't know if you're familiar with that. M-commerce is on the rise as well, although it's not quite as developed. Mobile buying is not quite as developed as it is in the UK. But think about 39% of the population has a smartphone, and 28% have a tablet. And the leading sites that I just mentioned, 19% of them, 90% of their turnover was via mobile devices for the first quarter of 2014. There's a 70% increase in sales in the first quarter of 2014. But I would say, even from personal experience, as I've said, as I'm saying here, there's a gap in ease of use and functionality between sites and mobile apps, and just in generally the design of mobile apps in France it's really not up to scratch. I would say one thing personally I've noticed is online banking in France in general is really not at the same level as it is in the UK, and that's certainly true of the mobile apps which go with it. But a lot of the sort of, the SNCF, train tickets, eBay and so on, a lot of e-commerce sites are now moving into mobile apps as well. So what are the key issues if you're looking to sell online in France? Well, you need to think about web optimization. That's about making your site accessible for a French person. Does it look French? Does it feel intuitive? Does it fit, well, right down to language? Are you going to turn your own website into French, or are you going to sell through a marketplace? Then you need to think about fulfillment of your orders. Do you use third parties? Obviously, things like credit card and PayPal payment are now standard, as are free returns, which is something which French people very much expect now as a given. There's something, what the French call the atomization of the offer. That means an increase in the number of websites. There's just so much more that it is difficult to achieve long-term profitability, and it means that the cost of customer acquisition, as in PR and marketing, goes up. And the existing online retailers make the market competitive by using sort of very aggressive pricing policies, which means the margins are lower than they would be for traditional retailers. With VAT, there's a distance selling threshold of 100,000 euros. So once you exceed that, you need to pay VAT in France for that year and the following year. Again, if you go on the FEVAD website, there's a lot of information about that. So the legislation, it's governed by the same consumer protection legislation as traditional mail order houses. And as a lot of it's under EU legislation, the French government was forced to extend the right to return goods or cancel orders from 7 to 14 working days, which is EU-wide. I mentioned the FEVAD before. This one, Label Site, is also a trade organization which kind of polices the sector. And Axel is also something you might want to note down, another association that might be worth looking into. There's an independent supervisory authority for data protection called the CNIL. And yeah, as under French law, which is very much about protecting consumers, every internet user has the right to see all the information that they're transmitting and to know who the recipient is and how they're going to use that information. So just some things to be aware of. So just more general information about France. It's the 4th largest export market for the UK. The UK exports 32 billion in products to France per year, which makes up 10% of UK worldwide exports. Obviously, it's very geographically close, and there's excellent transport links. It's possible to get to Paris or Lille in a day for meetings and back. And even now, I think they're extending the Eurostar all the way to Marseille direct. So it certainly makes it an attractive first choice for export. The market is very similar to the UK in terms of legislation, demand, size, technology, and there's huge trade fairs in France, huge international trade fairs. All day I've been talking to people who are interested in Maison et Objet, which is one of the biggest ones. There's several others, Who's Next, and many others. And Made in Britain is definitely something which is increasingly in demand. I don't know what that's to do with. I think it's, first of all, the Eurostar making it easy to get things across, but also just the number of French people that are now living in London and going back to France. And living in Paris, personally, I've just noticed that, well, in the past couple of years, the Marks and Spencers are just everywhere, and we've got Pret a Manger now, so British business is really blossoming and booming in France. So Made in Britain is definitely a selling point as a USP. So just some trends I noted down. Well-being products, that's a niche market which is estimated at 350 million in 2013. I don't have any more recent figures for that, but yeah, this is a kind of a niche market which is there to be taken advantage of, including male grooming products. Design, 76% of customers think the made in France aspect is important, but as I said, made in Britain is also on the rise as an important USP. With jewellery, there's a preference to buy cheaper products, probably because of the financial crisis, but it's no longer just silver and gold. There's also an increase in demand for what the French call fantaisie, or kind of costume jewellery. And then toys, there's an increased popularity in traditional toys. It's increasingly popular. So your sort of routes to market, direct to retailer, central purchasing offices. I think with giftware, especially homeware, they're sort of sold, well, homeware is sold through kind of grocery superstores and specialist multiples, so it's probably, because of the sheer number of these multiples, it's probably best to work with an agent if you're doing that. So yeah, local representation, commercial agent, you probably want to work with an agent who could be a sales rep across the country. And France is so huge that you may even need several agents. So that would be your local representation. In terms of intermediary, you can either work with a wholesaler, I suppose, who would buy and resell, or a distributor who would buy, do the marketing and so forth, and actually physically distribute the product. So some top tips for doing business in France. You need to be pretty persistent because the French are quite cautious when they do business, and it's quite a difficult market to crack, even if it's one of the most geographically close and perhaps one of the most obvious for a first destination for export. It's pretty difficult, actually. Obviously, the language thing. If you're ever translating anything, never use Google Translate, even though it's very tempting, as it never really gives you correct translations. In terms of business culture, France is very formal and kind of hierarchical. You would never use first names when you're speaking to people, when you're meeting them in a business context. You always have to use a polite vous form, and actually say monsieur, madame when you're speaking to somebody, and just generally be very respectful. Know your product and don't take a hard seller approach. I think what I mean by that is don't kind of, I said the French are very cautious when they do business. They want to see a kind of logical and technical argument. You can't just sort of rely on enthusiasm for your own product. My product is the best. They really need to see, they're very used to seeing sort of very logical Cartesian arguments for buying something. So that's something to bear in mind, definitely. So I suppose, yeah, do some research. Make sure you know the market in France for your product. Always quote prices in euros. Use metric measures. Might seem fairly obvious, but it's good to remember. Always kind of send things with a French translation if you can, and be informed of the legal aspects in the country because they may not be the same. Dress, I just put that down, it's fairly obvious, but France is quite, how should I say, physical appearance is important in France. They do take that seriously, so just bear that in mind. Same when you're meeting people, the French very much like to do business over a sit-down meal, and lunch is not something you eat at your desk in France. It's something you really go and take time to have. So just be aware of that if you're taking someone out for a working lunch. Be aware of the quiet periods of the year. France, particularly Paris, really shuts down. It completely shuts down in the month of August, and it's very quiet in July as well. So just if you're trying to get people at the end of the phone in July and August, just be aware that that's not going to be easy. And also don't expect instant replies to emails particularly. I don't know why, but things are a little bit slower off the mark. So your emails may well get ignored. You have to be persistent, as I said before. So how can we help at UKTI? Well, we do, I'm sure you might be familiar with the UKTI services, but we do, we produce market research reports, which can give you advice on routes to market, and right up to organizing meetings for you, identifying the correct contacts, and setting up meetings for you at the embassy. We can give you advice on trade fairs, which are the correct ones to attend, how to go about doing it, how to get funding to attend them. We organize webinars, which are online seminars, where you can simply just dial in, watch them online, interact, ask questions. We post business opportunities. That's when we become aware of an opening, or an agent who's looking for particular types of brand. I will post that on our website, and you can sign up for alerts. Then we organize events at the embassy and the ambassador's residence, and you can even hire facilities. It's really a wonderful embassy. It's a beautiful place, so it's certainly has cachet, and you're able to hire even small areas of it to maybe have a private showroom or something like that. Just one case study I just put in is a company, Contact by Conran, who we did an OMIS for, and OMIS is the market research reports we produce, sort of bespoke market research. And so we were able to actually identify the correct buyers for furniture at big department stores and furniture stores, present Content by Conran's products, and assess interest and feedback, then report that back to the company, and then on their feedback, set up meetings. So they are now working with one agent nationwide on the back of that report, and they're supplying one of the largest department stores. And we do like to keep in touch with companies after we've helped them out, so we still see them at various trade shows. Just a reminder, you can keep an eye on our webinars, which we do, very, very often, where we have sector specialists who come in and speak in English about the market in France and opportunities available. So keep an eye on the website. And just an example of some of the trade shows, there's so many in Paris. They're on a 6-monthly cycle, so just keep an eye on how you can get yourself out there, really. It's a good idea to speak to a trade advisor in the UK if you have one, who can advise you on funding and so on. Yep, so that's all I have to say, really. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them or come up and speak to me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming.